As this episode comes out, a new bill of global importance is becoming a law. It's a bill in one state that could set a template for all U.S. states. Across the world, anti democratic nations are watching this because they know it's a strike against one of their biggest goals, influencing the minds of Americans. This law involves education and American children. It's so important. You should have heard about it in big media, but you haven't. So far, they have ignored it because it hurts their agenda. They know that if you learn about this, you might get an even deeper understanding of how the media has gotten so warped. This story involves a state legislator who shared important information on a social media platform. The nation of Qatar saw that and got so concerned that its ambassador to the United States went after her.
We went back and forth a lot. I actually thought at one point that their account had been hacked. I couldn't believe that this is what the diplomats from Qatar were reducing themselves to.
She soon figured out why. Qatar has been pouring huge sums of money into the American education system to brainwash kids, and Qatari leaders don't want people to realize that. Previous reports have exposed this at the university level, but Qatar's campaign begins as early as kindergarten. Ahead, I'll tell you about really disturbing things this influence campaign has achieved. Lying to children by getting false materials into curriculums or curricula, whatever, take your pick. The Qatari ambassador's effort to attack this lawmaker backfired. She not only moved forward, but became one of the leading forces spearheading this first of its kind legislation. It requires the disclosure of foreign financing messing with our schools, contributions that in the past have taken place in the shadows. She is in Georgia, where this law will now take effect. A website that tracks this stuff calls it a landmark transparency law. It won't just affect Qatar's efforts, it will affect other countries that are also working to reach American kids while their minds are being formed, implanting anti-American and anti-Semitic messages through mimetic warfare. Those kids then grow up to become journalists and teachers and government officials and use their power as adults to rewrite history. Today, Democratic State Representative Esther Panitch joins me to explain the story behind this law, how the law works, and how it was designed to be as impactful as possible. Plus, a new report detailing the horrific sexual violence carried out by Gazan terrorists.
Disfiguring their faces and their sexual organs. You see that multiple times.
It's like they wanted to inflict pain in the cruelest manner possible. They have redefined evil.
Even CNN took a break from parroting Hamas talking points and reported on this. But the New York Times apparently turned it down in advance. Instead, the paper tried to get out ahead of it by running an insane opinion piece from one of their writers named Nicholas Kristof, who has a history of getting basics wrong. His disinterest in facts is why his run for governor of Oregon fell apart. That's ahead today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you here. My name is Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news you might know by now. But if you're new, I'll tell you, I spent 20 years in big mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN. You can learn about my background at the website linked in your show notes, or just visit me at joshlebs.com. I am all about fact checking. I used to do fact checking on air at CNN a lot, but I saw then and see more clearly than ever today how badly the media itself needs to be fact checked. Sometimes that means telling stories that the media ignores, which is what I'm going to be doing for you today. I always mention at the top, I have a newsletter. You should absolutely get it. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. So I provide links, images, video clips, all kinds of stuff to help you see these things for yourself. It's free. It's on Substack. It's called They Stand Corrected. And one of the best ways to support this show is to get yourself extra content by choosing to become a paid subscriber. We have a lot to dig into today, so I'm going to jump right into this. As bad as the big mainstream media is in so many ways, publishing and airing so many lies all the time, I never stop being amazed that we live at a time in which the dominant way to get information, the internet, plays up propaganda from Qatar. It is amazing what the anti-democratic government of Qatar achieved through its global propaganda mouthpiece known as Al Jazeera. If you search almost any topic in the news, you'll find Al Jazeera as one of the top links. You don't see that, fortunately, in general, on most topics with RT, Russia Today, IRNA from Iran, or other anti-democratic nations' state-owned propaganda giants. But you do see it with Al Jazeera. In an episode I did called Whitewashing Al Jazeera, I explained why. The Qatari government basically purchased pseudo-respectability. It came into America and gave jobs to all these U.S. journalists at a time when a lot of news agencies were failing, and they are grateful and became mouthpieces for the Qatari government. And in exchange, it got to be considered legitimate journalism, even though it lies all the time. But Qatar is not satisfied with just brainwashing people through Al Jazeera. It also does so through schools. Qatari funding at universities totals billions of dollars. There is a group I'll be talking about today, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. They report that Qatar has tossed at least $6.6 billion at schools. There's a good report about this at JNS. Cornell topped the list with more than $2 billion. Carnegie Mellon had about $1 billion. Texas A&M did as well, so did Georgetown. Recent reports show that universities that have opened campuses in Doha, they, of course, agree to follow the local laws, which includes banning people from criticizing the Qatari government. Qatar is an absolute monarchy with none of the democratic freedoms that many Americans take for granted. So, students and professors and others go to these campuses and spend the entire time there hearing only wonderful, positive things about the Qatari government. And what a coincidence. They come back thinking Qatar is so wonderful and right about everything and spreading that propaganda, especially for these young people there. Their brains are still being formed at that age. Qatar knows exactly what it's doing. Brandy Shufutinsky is the director of a program focused on education and national security at the group I just told you about, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD. She has a doctorate in education. She is in a movie about anti-Semitism on college campuses. All right, and follow me here because I'm going to get to the younger kid stuff in a minute. But first, you should hear this. This movie is called Blind Spot. She talks about how, as a Black woman, she recognizes that Black American history is being misused to spread anti-Semitism through false education. Here's a clip from that.
Probably one of the biggest insults and examples of cultural appropriation, this comparison of Palestinians to Black Americans. The Palestinians are descendants of people who colonized that land. That doesn't make a people indigenous. Black Americans, for the most part, are descendants of people who were brought here against their will and enslaved. The Palestinian people, whether it's from Hamas to the PA to Fatah, have gotten how many dollars in aid? And they use that money to try to murder not just Jews, not just Israelis, but anyone. To make that comparison is abhorrent.
So this kind of miseducation is going on at the college level. But Qatar is also not satisfied with that. They're starting younger. This woman I just played for you, Brandy Shufutinsky, and others at the organization, FDD, looked into what's being taught to children. She testified before a congressional committee and explained that the group's findings are disturbing.
There are multiple ways that anti-Jewish and anti-American ideology is becoming institutionalized in K-12 education, including teacher training programs, foreign-funded materials, radical union members, and curriculum development organizations. FDD has found foreign funding going directly to developing curriculum and K-12 teachers' salaries in multiple states. Multiple public school districts receive funds from Qatari Foundation International, an instrument of the Qatari royal family that is somehow able to operate as a 501c3 nonprofit in the United States outside of Foreign Agent Registration Act regulations.
How is Qatar doing this exactly? Well, it says it's bringing people in for training so they can teach Arabic. But its training is not just about language, it's also about culture. And that term is used broadly. Under culture, it tells people these insane things and finds people who will then force feed these insane things to children. It helps boost their careers in education. The FDD found that Qatari Foundation International, QFI, gave this one teacher in New York an Excellence Award. This teacher just so happened to use a map of the Middle East that erased Israel and called the whole region Palestine. Miseducating children is powerful. Another recipient of that same type of award has posted horrific images all over his social media. With anti-Semitic blood libel, he praised a Hamas leader. The FDD has written about the findings. Here's one at the Free Beacon. It talks about the Arabic Teachers Council of the South. On its YouTube, you can see a training video from the council and from QFI. All right, so from the Qatari government, entitled Using Films to Explore Social Justice Issues in Arabic Classes. This movie includes teachers sharing tips on how to get what they're calling social justice topics into the curriculum, even if parents disagree. The film tells people to get a green light from the school's diversity coordinator, and then that diversity coordinator can be a shield between the teacher and parents. Here is another piece of her congressional testimony. She's responding here to a question from Utah Congressman Burgess Owens. Actually, he's a former NFL player.
Can you give an example of some foreign funding supporting anti-Semitic course material or teachers?
Yeah, so part of that is coming from Qatari Foundation International, where they're funding Arabic language and culture classes in multiple school districts in multiple states. Some of that course material then is a complete revision of history, obviously demonizing the state of Israel.
That brings us to Georgia, the state where I live. You know, wherever you live, at any time, there could be a story of national or global importance happening in your backyard that the media ignores. Let me know. Part of correcting the media means course correcting the media and pointing out stories it ignores. Anyway, the Foundation for Defensive Democracies, FDD, got information on what Qatar is up to in this state. The organization found that QFI spent more than $280,000 on education in Georgia. $79,000 went to a place called Amana Academy. That's a public charter school that requires students to take Arabic. Amana Academy thanked QFI for paying for it to take students on a cultural tour of Qatar. So these kids are being taken to Qatar, a nation that funds terrorist leaders, including Hamas. And then this public charter school is thanking the government because QFI is a part of the government because it's an absolute monarchy. It gets worse, of course. QFI gave just over $200,000 to Georgia State University. Now, when you hear that, you might think, oh, well, that goes back to the university level stuff. Not exactly, because this money was earmarked to fund the Arabic Teachers Council, which trains people to become teachers in kindergarten through 12th grade. FDD has all these records showing pro-terror posts from people connected to this funding from Qatar. Sick stuff. Qatar likes to claim that it's not writing these curriculums, so it can't possibly be blamed. But that's the point. You get and brainwash the teachers, and you buy out the systems, the educators. And then they push these curriculum changes for you, and they find ways to do it. All of this is happening in the shadows at schools across the country right now. Qatar and other governments have been able to get away with this until now in Georgia because of a lawmaker who took action after being attacked by the Qatari ambassador to the United States. That's next.
And now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Josh Levs.
We are blessed to be able to have a speaker this evening who speaks with a lot of heart.
An outstanding author, a principled and groundbreaking journalist, a really engaging speaker and thinker.
broadcaster, journalist, and host of They Stand Corrected, the podcast fact-checking the news. Thank goodness.
Josh spent 20 years reporting for NPR and CNN, where he developed unique expertise on nonpartisan fact-checking. He has been called Truth Seeker in Chief.
Josh has won multiple Peabody Awards, Murrow Awards,
and awards from the AP, from the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Black Journalists, and more.
His book, All In, was published by HarperCollins and won the Nautilus Gold Award for promoting positive social change. He has spoken to the United Nations, Congress, Google.
And of course, I think is very cool, won a debate at Oxford.
He launched his podcast and newsletter called They Stand Corrected to provide listeners with the truth in a world of disinformation.
Clearly, he is a much-needed voice during these crazy times.
It's my pleasure to introduce Josh Levs to you today.
Please welcome.
Please join me in welcoming Josh Levs.
I love getting out there and meeting people like you. It's such a great opportunity to answer your questions and discover more about listeners to this show and potential listeners too. If you're interested in working out something in person or online, there's a form at my website, joshlevs.com. That's JOSHLEVS.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. Just click bookings. Esther Panitch is a Georgia state lawmaker, a Democrat, and the only Jewish person among the 236 members of the state assembly. She was in her first term in 2023.
After October 7th, the campuses went nuts. It felt very inorganic. It was very fast, the reaction, before Israel had responded to the horrors of October 7th. And all of a sudden, you're seeing this coordinated, nationwide, worldwide push to delegitimize Israel entirely, to essentially say it had it coming. Hamas are the good guys. I mean, just like the world was upside down. And there was always this thought, who's behind this? And I'm a lawyer. I only operate on what could I prove?
She went looking for truth, which is, say it with me, facts plus context. As you know, this information is not findable in big major media because they don't want you to know. She had an eye-opening experience about where some of this is coming from.
I had a colleague, a younger colleague, went through Georgia public schools and made some terrible comment about Israel. And I said, where are you getting this from? And he said, school. It was horrifying. And then a lot of things started to make sense.
She started to recognize that schools were pushing this craziness. She saw clearly what was happening at universities. She wanted facts on what was being done to the minds of younger kids. Then FDD came out with research earlier this year focused on Georgia. She shared it on X. She wrote this. Georgia, listen up. All this anti-Israel behavior we are seeing, removing Israel from current maps, anti-Semitic school assignments, etc., is not organic. It is paid for by Qatar, which has infiltrated our public schools. There must be full disclosure of every foreign donor. Here's what happened next.
I have maybe 12,000 followers. I'm not like this giant account. And within hours, the Qatari ambassador to the United States himself, then followed by his deputy, start coming at me. Not the consul to the southeast, but the Qatari ambassador and his deputy coming at me, telling me how wonderful Qatar is because they helped release the hostages. I responded to him, you can't take credit for releasing hostages you funded the hostage takers of. So we went back and forth. We went back and forth a lot. I actually thought at one point that their account had been hacked. I couldn't believe that this is what the diplomats from Qatar were reducing themselves to, a tit for tat on X with a Georgia state legislator. So at that moment, I knew there was something there because why else would they be involved? I care so much FDD was onto something. They didn't challenge any of the information FDD provided, which was that hundreds of thousands of dollars had flown through Qatar to Georgia public schools, including a charter school in my county and Georgia State University, a major public school. And coincidentally or not, it was where the loudest protests were heard within the state on campus after October 7th.
You can see this back and forth. I'll put it in the newsletter for you. These high-level Qataris were so freaked out by this exposure. They started telling her that she should only listen to certain statements about Qatar from the Trump administration.
This is the United States. I can trust whatever source I deem credible. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the official one, especially since our president just accepted a giant plane from Qatar. I don't put that much trust in the official source. So they thought I had some duty to accept whatever I was being fed.
That's a very Qatari thing to say. It's actually a very non-democratic way of thinking. But Qatar, especially with its giant propaganda arm, Al Jazeera, is able to say whatever it wants all the time and is used to being spoiled by the world and the big mainstream media that treats Al Jazeera as though it's anything other than Qatari state-owned media.
Oh, yeah. And they kept trying, and I kept pushing back. I actually said, I suppose you have no problem with transparency then, if you're so proud of all your work. Didn't really get very far. It was misleading the public is harmful, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I'm jumping back in here because I want to help you understand how hilarious this is. Qatar told her that misleading the public is harmful. Oh, man. There is no entity in the world doing more to mislead people than Qatar. You know, over the years, we've heard a lot of legitimate complaints, especially from people on the left, about Trump calling things fake news while pushing fake news. That's what Qatar does. But people on the left still make Qatar's propaganda their favorite source of news. Speaking of that hypocrisy, here is something you should know. In Qatar, what the government deems to be fake news, false news, is banned. It's illegal. Meanwhile, Qatar broadcasts lies at home and to the entire world through Al Jazeera. There's no end to the open, proud hypocrisy. All right, so back to Esther's stuff. Other people jumped in on this back and forth on X, the social media platform. Someone Esther knows joined her in calling out the anti-Semitism. This was another Jewish woman. Then the Qatari deputy chief of mission wrote this, quote, "You're spreading disinformation and trying to Carter frictions as people like you always do."
My friend, who he was referring to along with me, not a politician. So this wasn't about politicians. This was about Jews. And I called it out. I said, we all knew it would come to this at some point. The Qatari ambassador's deputy chief just told my Jewish friend and me we're spreading disinformation like people like you always do. People like me. Let that sink in. I'm an American, a Jewish woman, a Georgia legislator, and a proud Zionist asking for transparency in Georgia public schools. If that's threatening to Qatar, it tells you everything you need to know.
He, of course, insisted he did not mean that and has Jewish friends and blah, blah, blah. Qatar was founded in 1971 and has Sharia law as its central source of law. Its schools teach kids to hate Jews. There's a report on that from the Council on Foreign Relations. There are virtually no Jews in Qatar. There's this recent report, an Islamic education textbook for 2025 to 2026 teaches that one of the ways to measure a good Muslim woman is to raise children to sacrifice their lives in what is understood to be violent jihad. So, it's no surprise that the FDD finds that lessons portraying suicide bombing as being not so bad are working their way into U.S. schools through this Qatari influence campaign. Why has this been in the shadows? Well, under federal law, a school only has to report a gift like this if it's $250,000 or more. That's very high. Qatar has been able to give less than that to lots of places in different ways across different times, and no one figured it out. The new law in Georgia lowers that threshold to $10,000. That is a sea change.
We also had to make sure that these foreign governments couldn't just make a U.S. LLC and put the money through that way. I've been a trial lawyer for 30 years. I know how people try to scam the system on certain things or find loopholes.
I told Esther that trying to warp the minds of kids is what bad guys did in like a 1980s movie. I had a specific memory of one, so I looked it up. If you're old enough, you might remember this too. There was this miniseries called America with a K. It was about what could have happened if America lost the Cold War and Russia took over the country. One of the first actions was changing the education system to teach kids to hate America and everything about how the country functions and to embrace communism. Now we are living at a time in which tons of young people are spreading anti-American and anti-democratic hatred. That awful streamer I've told you about who's being embraced by the left, Hassan Piker, he has said the end goal is communism. Here is something really interesting Esther told me.
I went to Jewish day camp in the 80s. Our biggest concern at that time was cults. That's what we were taught, how to spot a cult on college campuses and to stay away from it and what the cults did to try to like influence your mind. Now, I feel like that has been borne out. We're seeing, to a degree, far right, but more far left from what I can see. I think we need that education again.
She's right. Our country needs that. Coming up, a new landmark report on the horrific sexual violence carried out by Hamas. There is a group called the Civil Commission on October 7th Crimes by Hamas Against Women and Children. It has come out with a new extensive report detailing the horrific sexual violence by the Gazan terrorists of Hamas, backed by Iran. Here's a clip from a video accompanying the report.
He started touching me and I resisted, and then he dragged me to the bedroom.
Disfiguring their faces and their sexual organs. You see that multiple times.
It's like they wanted to inflict pain in the cruelest manner possible. They have redefined evil.
Even CNN took a break from saying whatever Iran wants them to say in a given day to at least report on the existence of this and how extensive and serious it is. Of course, we can expect that in the coming days, CNN will have lots of people on its airwaves and website denying these realities. The Israeli Foreign Ministry said that the New York Times was offered this report in advance and rejected it. That is 100% believable based on what the Times itself does. The Times instead tried to get out ahead of this report. The paper ran an opinion piece from a guy you might have heard of named Nicholas Kristof, passing along these disgusting allegations that he had heard from propagandists. It involves Israelis carrying out certain acts of sexual violence against Palestinian prisoners, including involving dogs. And meanwhile, there are these animal science experts who say that's not even possible. His source is a Hamas-linked group in Europe, and he has no evidence. Everywhere there are power imbalances. There are people who take advantage of those. Everywhere there are prisoners, some who are sexually assaulted, which is horrifying. In a previous episode, I reported on the denazification of Germany by the Allied occupying forces. That occupation was essential for leading to a new Germany and getting rid of Nazi control. But during that time, there were rapes by Allied soldiers. In democracies, the people can demand that their leadership investigate and hold perpetrators responsible. But in anti-democratic places like Gaza and Iran, leaders support this stuff and carry it out. The Times refuses to tell its audiences all kinds of things that I've reported here, like that Iran rapes girls and women who are in prison for having protested. It rapes them systematically, and it justifies those actions through this twisted belief that if they're raped, they won't get to go to heaven. When Hamas demanded that Israel release prisoners in exchange for hostages, those prisoners included gems like a Palestinian whose big claim to fame was that he raped and killed a 13-year-old Israeli boy. That's who the Palestinians wanted released. Meanwhile, this Kristof thing, even the Times didn't run this as a news story. They ran it as an opinion piece, which is their way of trying to shield themselves from any accountability. There are groups that have pieced through this Kristof thing and exposed it. I've shared that in the newsletter. But here's some other things you should know. As I mentioned, he has a long record of getting stuff wrong. He fell for a claim from a Cambodian activist who apparently invented a whole backstory for herself. In writing about that, he blamed sources. And here's a quote from what he wrote. "We journalists often rely to a considerable extent on people to tell the truth. That is the opposite of the job of journalism. We should never rely on that. Fact check everything you can and share information about the credibility of the people making those claims. The job is not to pass along whatever people say, assuming it's true." Well, he was just recently called out for ignoring facts about education and literacy, but maybe the clearest example of all is one outside of stuff he wrote. Just a few years ago, he attempted to run for governor of Oregon. He claimed, including in official sworn papers, that he met the requirement living in Oregon for at least 3 years leading up to the election. But in that same time frame, he voted in New York and attested that that was his residence. It can't be both legally. This was so obvious, but he was apparently totally unprepared for anyone to even look at the facts. So he hired an expensive group of lawyers to argue that he could get away with this. They put together this 15-page letter that became a joke. On local news station KGW, a guy named Dan Haggerty dissected this letter. It started okay. Like it pointed out that Kristof owned a home in Oregon, and through his family, he had this agricultural business there. Then this.
He has hiked the entire length of Oregon along the Pacific Crest Trail. That just kind of sounds like a flex, but okay. He sent his children to OMSI camps. I really feel like we're losing relevance here to being governor. He backpacked around Mount Hood, and now we're just saying stuff that people do when they come here. He's eaten at Moe's in Lincoln City. What are we talking about? I feel like they just are getting to the point in that where they're listing random things.
He also did an interview with that same station in which he presented super helpful arguments like this.
I think that, what's more important than checking the boxes here and there is that my soul is here. My bones are here.
Well, if your soul and bones are there, who cares what the law says? The Supreme Court of Oregon ruled against him, of course. A guy with this track record who doesn't look for facts and then tries so hard to deny them. This is who the Times entrusts to run with the most incendiary allegations you can make against Israel at a time that Jews are under attack by people with vitriolic hatred of the tiny Jewish state. Then again, the Times has run op-eds directly from terrorists, including inside Hamas. Do not pay the New York Times for news. You can almost surely get all their stuff for free. I tell paid subscribers to my newsletter how to access the Times and tons of other sites for free legally. As always, I want to hear what you think about all this. Let me know your thoughts, send questions, links you want me to fact check. There are 2 great ways to reach me. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website, joshlevs.com. This was a packed episode today. There wasn't time for an ad break, so I'll take this second to say this show relies on your support. You can support in various ways. There's PayPal, buymeacoffee.com/joshlevs. You'll see all that stuff in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.